What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to show you guys how to change tire pressure sensors without a tire machine and with common hand tools that you would have at home. Alright, so before we really dive into the nuts and bolts of this video, as you guys can see, I had a tire pressure monitor fault. Basically, one of the batteries was starting to go dead in one of these tire pressure sensors, and if you guys know anything about these, more or less, basically what's inside is there's a little watch battery in this area that powers this sensor, and that's what sends the radio frequency to the computer to say, hey, this is what the tire pressure is. So this vehicle is about 12 years old, has 150,000 miles on it, and basically the batteries are starting to go dead in the sensors. So that's why I'm replacing them. Obviously, you know, your situation may vary, but that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm going to show you guys how to change one of these out at home with minimal tools. Alright, so to change out one of these TPMS sensors, first thing you got to do obviously is remove the wheel. Alright, now you got the wheel off the car, you want to either take the valve core out of the stem using one of these valve core tools, or you need to let all of the air out of the tire. I'm just going to remove the valve core. It's a little bit quicker that way, and I have the tool to do it, so that's the way I'm going to do it. Alright, once you have the wheel off the car, all the air out of the tire, what you're going to do is go in the back of the car and pull out the scissor jack to install the spare. And what I do is I'll take a block of wood, put a block of wood on the tire, set my scissor jack on the block of wood just like that, and I'm going to use the scissor jack to push it down on the sidewall of the tire to break the bead so we can get to the TPMS sensor. So what I'm doing is obviously I'm just going to try to jack up the car. Now instead of the car going up, the tire is going to go down. So what that'll do is that should break the bead on the tire, and it should get us access to the TPMS sensor. Now, you have to bear in mind not all tires are the same. So like if you're doing a light truck tire, like a truck tire, obviously those are designed to carry more weight. So the sidewall is going to be thicker. It's going to be harder to do this. Also, if you're trying to do this to a low profile tire, again, the sidewalls are going to be much stronger and it's going to be harder to do this. But by putting the block of wood on the floor jack, pretty much ensures that you're not going to damage the sidewall of the tire by doing this. And as you guys can see, there, the bead just broke, and that's what we needed. If you guys have a vehicle that does not have a scissor jack like this, my suggestion would be to get like a 6 or 8 foot 2x4, and what you're going to do is you're actually going to take a piece of wood like this, run a 2x4 across the top of it, use 2 screws, hold this into the 2x4, and you're going to basically use this as a pry bar. So you'll take a piece of wood, go underneath the rocker, and push down on this, and you're going to push down on the sidewall of the tire with like a long piece of wood if you guys don't have a scissor jack. Realistically, that's about the only other way you're going to do this, unless you take it to somebody with a tire machine. But chances are, if you're watching this video, you don't own a tire machine. So yeah, this is how I'm getting this done. And as you guys be able to see, works well. Not the quickest thing in the world, but definitely gets the job done. All right, so to get this sensor out, this particular one has an 11mm nut on the outside of the wheel. It's going to vary depending on what kind of car you're working on. Some of them have bolts on the inside of the sensor going into the stem. Other ones, I know some of the older ones have big bands that go around the rim, and the sensor itself is actually held into the band around the rim. Those aren't too common anymore. Most of them are all stem mount just like this. But so on this Honda, it's an 11mm nut. You take the nut off the outside, And then this will come down through the bottom of the wheel. Now you don't want to drop this into the tire because it's going to be a pain in the butt to get it out, but there you go. So that sensor's out, and then to put the new one in, it's going to be just the reverse of that. So here's our new sensor. Comes with a new nut, new washer. Take your dust cap off the outside. The washer goes on first. Nut goes on the outside. In this style like this, you really just have to snug them up. If you go too tight, you'll break the stems, so pay attention. There you go, that's all there is to it. Now we gotta pop the bead back on. So this one I have here in particular is a Honda. Like I said, this one's held on with 11mm nut on the outside, but this thing's doing something that's kind of common with these Honda ones, is when you go to loosen the nut on the outside, the whole stem is actually spinning inside the sensor. So I may or may not need to cut, actually just cut the inside of this stem off to get the sensor off the stem. I've tried, some vice grips and holding the stem on the inside of the wheel with some vice grips, and that's not really working too well. So I may just end up cutting this thing to get this thing out of here. As you guys can see, I'm just using an air-powered die grinder to cut the bottom of this valve stem off the bottom of this sensor. But you could 100% just use a hacksaw, sawzall, whatever you have at your disposal to do this. Just obviously make sure you don't cut the sidewall of the tire while you're doing this. All right, so when you go to pop the bead back on, grab some WD-40 or something similar and just go around the bead of the tire. And what that'll do is it'll help it, it'll help the tire slide on the rim and pop back on the bead easier. The wheel and tire is actually sitting on the tire right now, and the ground is kind of pulling up on the tire, helping it get seated on the bead. So just keep that in mind if you're having problems getting this thing back on here. But for the most part, unless you're dealing with something low profile, they're pretty easy to pop back on. And you'll know when it pops back on. As you guys heard, it'll pop just like that. So now you're just going to fill it up to whatever that pressure is that's listed on the inside of the driver door. And then you got to go through and retrain the sensors. I'll show you guys kind of how to do that, but that's going to depend on what kind of vehicle you're working with. If you guys find yourself in a situation kind of like what I was in, where the batteries are going bad and the sensors, you can 100%, just pull the sensor out, pop the back of it off, and when you pop the back of it off, there's a bunch of silicone inside. If you dig through the silicone and dig the silicone out of there, there's a battery there. So if you go online and buy the battery, you'd have to resolder it into the sensor, silicone it back up and put it back together. But that is a viable option if you guys want to save some money. These sensors I think were like 20 bucks a piece. So obviously if you buy the batteries and you're willing to dedicate a little bit extra time to this, 100%, you could just replace the batteries if you so desired. For me, it's a little bit more work than what I wanted to get into, especially when you couple that with the fact that these are 12 years old, 150,000 miles, and you take into account the number of potholes and expansion joints on bridges and things like that. These things have hit and just been jarred for 12 years. For 20 bucks a piece, I'll just replace them and not have to worry about it. But 100%, yes, if you want to desolder the battery and solder a new one in, silicone it back up, put the backpack on, absolutely, you can just replace the batteries in these. All right, so now that the sensors are installed in all 4 tires, I got the vehicle back down on the ground, there's one last thing that we have to do. So I'm going to use this Untitled TS501 to basically reprogram the computer with the TPMS new ID numbers. So if you guys take a look here, I'll show you guys. Each one of these sensors has an ID number on it, and the computer is looking for that ID number. So when you change out these sensors, they aren't going to have the same ID number, therefore it's not going to find the tire pressure sensors and you're going to have an issue. So what you have to do is you have to go through and basically retrain the computer or reprogram the sensors depending on what style of sensor you got and things like that. Like I said, I'm using this TS501 from Untitled to reprogram the computer in the car to the new ID numbers that are in the sensors. One thing I can tell you guys real quick is some of these sensors, some of the aftermarket sensors are what's called clonable, and the clonable sensors, what they do is you essentially use a tool like this or similar to this that pulls the old ID number off the old sensor and copies it and transfers it to the new sensor. So you're not actually changing the ID number in the computer. The way I'm doing this with this, the sensors that I have are not clonable, therefore I can't change the ID number of the sensor. So the only way that I can program this car is by telling the computer the new ID number. The only way you can do that is with a TPMS tool or some sort of scan tool that physically plugs into the OBD2 port. There's a bunch of these on the market that you're supposed to just wave them over the sensors and basically wake them up. Those are for more or less cloning. Unless your car has, you know, like a dedicated learn procedure in it. Again, just going to depend on the type of vehicle you're working on. There's a couple other things that I wanted to say before I ended this video. First of which, because you're only breaking the top bead on the tire, the bottom bead is still sealed. The reason that matters is with the bottom bead still sealed, you can't rotate the wheel inside the tire, and if you don't rotate the wheel inside the tire, you won't have to rebalance the wheel and tire assembly. Also, in regards to that, as long as you install a sensor of the same weight as the one you took out, naturally the balance on your wheels and tires is going to be the same. So with that in mind as well, you kind of want to install a sensor that is the same weight as the one you took out. That way, naturally, you don't have to get your wheels and tires rebalanced. Most of these sensors are fairly light. I bet you this one's less than an ounce. And chances are the aftermarket ones that you're going to install or one similar to this really isn't going to affect the balance of the tire that much to even be noticeable. But it's something to keep in mind for you guys. The other thing I wanted to bring up is the banded style sensors. I'll put some pictures on the screen from Ford as far as their service procedure on the band style sensors. But like I said earlier in the video, they're really not all that common anymore. I'm not sure that they're going to be serviceable without taking the tire completely off the rim. You may be able to get it done, you may not. I've never used this procedure on a band style TPMS sensor, so whether or not this procedure is going to work for a band style, at this point, I can't really tell you. Like I said, I'll put Ford's service procedure on the screen for you guys. Feel free to pause it at any time so you can kind of look it over if you guys own one of those style sensors. The last thing I wanted to say is I'll have links in the description, as always, to the TPMS tool that I used. This one, I'm not going to lie, is going to set you back about 220 bucks, but it has lifetime free updates according to Untitled, and as you guys saw, it physically plugs into the OBD2 port, so it's a little bit more capable than some of the cheaper ones on the market that strictly clone TPMS sensors. I may shoot another TPMS sensor video in the future as far as cloning and how to program these things using this Untitled. Just going to depend on, you know, what I have going on and that sort of thing. But as always, guys, if you guys like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content, go down and hit subscribe. As always, thanks for watching, guys.